So thank you all very much for coming today. Before we begin today, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands and waters where we're currently broadcasting from, the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nations and the Bunurong people of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands where this broadcast will be received, and acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past and present also. So today we're going to be having a discussion around higher education in Australia and experiences of higher education as First Nations students. My name is Dr. Al Fricker. I'm a very proud Dja Dja Wurrung man in the School of Education at RMIT University. And I have three of our absolutely deadly First Nations students here with me today. They are Shy, Chelsea and Hayden. So let's kick it off at this point. And first question to you, Shy, is where is your mob from and what are you currently studying at RMIT?
My mob is from Mustig Island in the Kulkalaig Nation of Zenid Keths, also known as the Torres Straits. And I'm studying the Bachelor of Urban and Regional Planning, the honours degree.
Thank you. And Chelsea, so where's your mob from and what are you studying?
My mob is Palawa from Tasmania and I'm studying a Bachelor of Education.
Excellent, thank you. And Hayden, same questions to you. Where's your mob from and what are you studying currently?
I'm a Yuin man from the south coast of New South Wales. I just graduated from my Bachelor of Arts in Music Industry and I'm about to start my Master in Music at New York University.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank
well
you.
done. So first big questions we've got here today are around what your journey to university has been like. So are you studying what you initially thought you wanted to study? And how did you find the adjustment from secondary school to university? And anybody can open up with this question if you'd like.
I'm keen to go first.
Please. Yeah.
So I always wanted to do sound production. This course, the course that I studied, offered elements of sound production, but it also offered management skills and cultural skills, so like political and a range of other subjects.
Great. And how did you find your transition from high school to university? What was that like?
I found it, though it was like super different growing up in a regional town and then coming to the city, I was pretty relaxed with it. I'd prepared, I took a gap year and took my time to prepare for this experience. And I was fortunate enough to get some scholarships to live on campus, so a lot of that stress I didn't have. So yeah, that sort of segue was really nice for me.
Excellent, thank you. I'll throw it over to you, Chelsea.
Yes.
So, what has your journey to university been like? Are you studying what you initially wanted to study? And how was your transition from high school to university? What was that like?
When I was little, I always wanted to be a teacher because I just thought that my teachers were like the coolest thing ever. But during high school, I didn't think that I'd be able to be capable of going to uni. And then, throughout year 12, I thought like, oh, this could be a possibility. And then that's when I really looked into it and decided that that's really what I wanted to do. And my journey to uni, I studied year 12 at RMIT, so it was quite easy for me to go to uni because like all the resources and everything's the same, and also my sister went to RMIT, so she really helps me when I have any questions or need help with anything as well. Great,
thank you. And Shy?
My journey to university has been an interesting one. When I was a child, I knew that I always wanted to go to university. When I was about 7, I decided I wanted to be a physiotherapist, which is not what I'm studying. So I guess in that way, I'm not studying what I first thought I was going to. But yeah, I knew that I always wanted to go to university, and then I actually didn't finish high school. It just wasn't the space for me. It wasn't a comfortable learning environment. But even then, I was still very aware that I wanted to go to university. I just didn't really know what I wanted to study. So I left high school in year 12, went straight to work, and then actually didn't return to university until I was 23. You know, around the age of 20, I discovered urban planning, and it kind of just, you know, it was like one of those light bulb moments. It had been in front of me the whole time. It all made sense. And so then working towards going to university, relocating to Melbourne just seemed like the right thing to do.
So we can see here that there's been a variety of experiences of transition to university. What I'd like to explore now is some ideas around what your experience as a university student has been like. So the first big question here is, having come to university now, would you say it's met your expectations, exceeded them, has it missed them? What did you think it would be like, and has that matched up with what it's actually been like?
I think it has met my expectations. Yeah, I don't know, I didn't really have too many expectations. I just thought I'd give it a go, and if it was too hard or something, then I could always just, like, you know, not continue. But I really enjoyed it, and something I can, like, see myself doing. Yeah, is that fine?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of similar in the sense that I didn't have any expectations, and I sort of learnt early on with the things that I did, particularly with music, to just let it happen, I guess. I didn't know what I wanted to do after uni because we don't really get asked that question. I was thrown into a lot of politics in my course, so I was deep in that sort of philosophical realm when it came to music. And that, I think, has really benefited me as an artist and as, I guess, a scholar, because I now want to use my experience through university and my skills that I've developed to contribute towards linking First Nations culture to sound and sound production.
Fantastic. And Shy, what did it match your expectations?
Yeah, I didn't have a huge expectation except for the fact that it just felt like more of a safer space than high school did. And I don't know if that's because I was around older people, I'm not too sure, but it just felt more inviting for myself.
Great, thank you. We know that universities are a colonial construction. We know that prior to the Europeans colonising Australia, there was no such thing as a university as we experience it today. As a colonial construction, it has specific aims and purposes. So my next question is, as a First Nations student, what is it like navigating the university and the university systems? I'll throw it over to you, Shy.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting one to navigate. I didn't really think I would have to start off with, but with my particular degree, you know, in planning, we cover a lot of policy, city design, that sort of thing, and there's a lot of perspective that I think is missed without having the link between First Nations people and knowledge with the planning system. So I think even that it in itself is sort of demonstrated through the university setup. I've probably just gotten even deeper into trying to decolonize every space I've ended up being in. You know, I didn't think that as a student I would now be working in the student union to try and decolonize essentially the university in the ways that I can and doing what I can do.
Great, thank you. And Chelsea, what's it like navigating your degree as a First Nations student at the university?
I find that it's really fun, and like so far everyone's been really accepting and understanding, and yeah, I have lots of support, so yeah.
Great, thank you.
We all come from different disciplines, and those ideas in terms of colonisation are reflected in our disciplines. Coming from an arts background, it was extremely inclusive, whether it be race, gender, sex. we took the time to learn about culture, and we took the time to learn about identity. In terms of navigation, it's definitely up to not only those in higher places within the university, but also our teachers. And I think that, like I was saying, it's reflected within our discipline, which is obviously led by our teachers. And likewise with any other type of education, whether it be primary, secondary, tertiary.
This leads me to the next question around, do you think the higher education sector is a force for continuing colonisation? If so, why? If not, why not? What are your thoughts on that? Who would like to go first?
I think it is.
Yep.
In my degree, I've noticed it's a lot of, like, the teaching and learning is very like reading and writing, not so much traditional, like, First Nations ways of teaching and learning, like such as like Dreamtime stories, yarning, dancing, art. Like, none of that is really in that, and that also is a lot in, like, primary and high school as well.
Great answer, thank you.
I think that if we're talking about the institution as an entity, then absolutely. But like I was saying before, there are people within the institution that try their best to steer away from that Western perspective. I always use this example when I talk to anyone about, I guess, Westernization within institution is like, in My Blood It Runs, where we see an example of a First Nations student, primary student, struggle with a Western institution being primary school, because there are two ways of knowing. I think we have the benefit being in more so tertiary education, where we get to challenge those ideals. I remember someone I'm really close to, we had a similar conversation, and one of the points that they brought up was, as First Nations scholars or students, to be within a colonial system doesn't mean that we are being colonised. It means we are extending to our ways of knowing.
So it builds our capacity to sort of walk in two worlds.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we can cover the things that we need to cover that are culturally important to us as First Nations people, and give us opportunities to engage with Western ways of thinking, being, knowing and doing, and those systems that allow us to continue to maintain our own cultural practices and contexts, but also be more broadly successful
Absolutely.
as well, based on non-Indigenous ideas of what success is, which of course don't necessarily match up with ours. Did you have any thoughts on that question?
Yes, it is an institute that continues colonisation, but like Hayden said, you know, I think my own personal experience is just to gain more of an understanding, you know, how I can create a bridge between the planning industry and First Nations people, not just myself, but so that there is a bridge created, you know, literally, but also theoretically, because there isn't one. And, you know, I think for First Nations people and culture to survive in this Western world, unfortunately, there are parts of the system that we need to learn about.
Thank you. Great answer. So this moves us to the third section of this discussion, where we're going to talk about the Australian higher education sector more broadly, and recognising your own experiences and your own knowledge and expertise that you bring to this space as First Nation students. The question I'd like to ask you first is, what do you think are a couple of critical areas where the university and the higher education sector more broadly could focus to support both the inclusion of First Nations students, but also First Nations student success? So what kind of reforms, what kind of critical areas could be engaged with to support those outcomes?
I think, from my experience, I will draw from one instance where I took a class, an elective in sex and race, and we had the opportunity to focus on Indigenous philosophy, and we had access to, readings by Indigenous scholars that discussed Indigenous ways of knowing, and really important concept of Western ways of knowing claiming to be superior over other forms of knowing. And that made me feel proud to be able to read a reading that, that we call these texts, not only by a First Nation scholar, but by someone who was challenging that way of knowing. So I think that is one step that we can take towards that, is to include these philosophies into our programs.
So it's about creating opportunities to include First Nation scholarship within broad contexts of subjects, and also reforming curriculum so it's actually present and visible.
Absolutely.
I think that's a fantastic idea. Chelsea, do you have an idea or any ideas around what could be changed to support First Nations, both engagement with and success through higher education?
Maybe like more inclusion of like First Nations, like traditional ways of learning, like I mentioned before. I think that would be really beneficial.
For sure, I completely agree. I mean, we are the oldest continuing cultures in the world. Mm-hmm. We know that culture is not innate, it's learnt. So it stands to reason then that we're the oldest teachers and learners in the world. And so our ways of teaching and learning would undoubtedly have a positive impact, not only on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, but more broadly on students regardless of their cultural context. They're tried, they're true, they're tested. We know they work. They've got tens of thousands of years of data to back that up. So I think that's a great point, reforming pedagogy. So we move away from that sort of teacher-focused lecture style or tutorial style and move into a more interactive, immersive. Great. Thank you. Did you have any thoughts around reform?
Yeah, I mean, I think funding is a really important thing. For a lot of First Nation students, we travel, we relocate to study, and we still oftentimes have to work full time, still have to support ourselves, still have to be able to survive, but also want to generally do really well at our studies. So I think just funding in ways of extra support, to students, but also to further the education as well. I think it will be able to, funding in all areas really, will be able to really help create that engagement, participation, just continuation of First Nation students in higher education. Because I think that, I know many First Nations people who wanted to continue with university, but it was just too stressful to be able to try and essentially work 2 full-time jobs to get a degree. I think that's a really important one.
Thank you. Yeah, funding is hugely important, especially when we have many students who come from a context whereby there's expectations around continuing to support community as well, even though they may be many hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometres away, and that can create an additional challenge for many students. So I suppose one of the final questions I have here is, we've talked about that sort of reform, but are there any specific positive steps that could be undertaken to improve and create a more inclusive higher education system in the country? Like if there was one thing on your wish list that you could click your fingers and change tomorrow that you think would have a huge impact, what would that be?
I think having more First Nations people in academia and more funding towards research for our own culture, Like that's one of the reasons why I want to continue to do my master's and PhD, because I want to explore an area that hasn't been explored yet in our culture. So encouragement and funding and support to be able to, for us to be able to do that, would be amazing. Yeah, that's one thing that I would change, that just encourage that research.
Great, thank you.
I think if there's one thing I could change tomorrow, and this is based purely just off of my experience in higher education so far, having to do group presentations or just group work, but mostly presentations, that would be probably making like some sort of mandatory welcome to country, or sorry, acknowledgement of country short course that students have to do, where they learn about the country that they're on, the traditional owners. Because, you know, I think just, yeah, from my own experience, it's, you know, I always want to do an acknowledgement of country, but I don't always want to be the first speaker. And it's one of those things that I feel comes from my own experience, has come hand in hand. You know, I think people, I've had, you know, I know many people that want to do it, but they don't feel like they have the confidence to do it. You know, being in a classroom with a First Nations person, they don't want to offend someone, but they also don't want to offend someone by not doing it or the incorrect pronunciation. So I think, you know, personally, that would just be a small stepping stone so that students would, you know, get a little taste of the country they're on.
Great.
I probably agree with you in just like things like acknowledgement of country at the start would be a positive step forward. Some of my subjects do that, but not all of them. And yeah, also just like including like Indigenous culture and ways of learning into each like subject, I feel like would be good.
Great, thank you all so much. So just some final thoughts. As a First Nations academic and a very proud Dja Dja Wurrung man myself, I hear what you're saying, and on the one hand I'm heartened by that, because we have a new generation of First Nations students who are proud and deadly and just absolutely kicking goals, which is just so wonderful to see. But a lot of the same challenges that you face are the same challenges that I faced when I went through my university career as well as a student. And so as a sector, it's clear that we need to be doing more to support our youth, to support our future development and growth, and the active decolonisation of this sector and of these spaces is going to be a key part of that moving forward. So I'd like to thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your thoughts. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that anybody watching this broadcast will learn a lot as well. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thanks.
too deadly. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.